is just glaring over at us. And I just look at the guy like, you lost out, you fucking asshole, racist piece of shit.
Hi again, it's Thomas here from Sleepless Studios. Thanks for listening to Sleepless, a podcast about the creative process. This is the final episode before we officially unveil the new studio. This episode was recorded out of studio over Zoom. Scotty Hard wasn't able to come into the studio, but we couldn't pass up the opportunity to interview him. And what an interview it was. Thanks so much for watching, and please enjoy our interview with the incredible Scotty Hard. And welcome back to the Sleepless Pod.
We are back, baby.
Yes, and this week we have the privilege of being joined by Scott. Welcome, Scott.
Hello. Hello, lads.
Yes. That's your cover. So we usually ask people just to do a brief intro about themselves.
Are you guys supposed to do that? Like, what? Come on. Okay. My name is Scotty Hard. I'm a Brooklyn-based musician, producer, engineer. I've been here for 35 years, originally from Vancouver. I do a wide variety of musical production. I do a little bit of teaching, but mostly just to make records. I actually had a guy trying to convince me to go and teach at NYU the other night. And I was like, I'm busy making records, man. Like I don't really have time to do that. But I do believe in sort of passing on the knowledge, but there might be a sort of an opportunity to do that in the future. But right now, yeah, I'm just very busy doing that. I do a lot of, I started out as most people who do this, or a lot of people who do this, playing in bands in Vancouver, a variety of different bands, and moved to New York in 1989. I had a real interest in hip hop at the time. And there was obviously nobody doing that in Canada at the time. So I came here and just started making rap records and worked with the Jungle Brothers and the Black Sheep and Ultramagnetic MCs. And I never worked with Public Enemy, but they kind of inspired me to really, they were the ones who kind of inspired me to move to New York in a way. I heard It Takes a Nation of Millions, and I was like, okay, that's it. I gotta go to New York. Yeah, and I had sort of had I think New York was sort of my destiny for a long time because, all the music that kind of had inspired me, from jazz, bebop, to, Miles Davis, to noise rock, to downtown music, and all the sort of melange of that kind of stuff, to, the no wave movement and all the sort of downtown music that came out of that, the Bill Laswell material, the Golden Palomino, stuff like that. And it's been quite gratifying to have now, after all these years, work with a lot of those people.
What's your views now of, like, you were probably in New York at the heart of the scene of hip hop when it was, as you said, Canada really didn't have much at the time. What's your opinion on how hip hop has kind of evolved into what you see today? Like the pros and negatives of it all.
Well, it's obviously become very commercial, and I think that it's influenced everything. I mean, it's really changed the sort of the character of all music that's being made, from country music to any kind of international music across the whole world. And I remember running into some sort of Vancouver, music people that I knew, like other kind of engineer type people, 10 or so years in, and they're like, "Oh, you're still making rap records? When are you gonna start making real records?" And I was kind of like, like hip hop has made more of an impact on music than any other music style in the last 50 years. So to sort of, glibly dismiss that is kind of ignorant,
Yeah.
and some could say racist. So and I mean, in terms of like commercial rap music, I mean, it's really got to the point where it's
Hit a limit.
borderline unlistenable. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't really, personally, as a person of my age, I don't really listen to that kind of music very often. But I mean, there's always really great music of all genres that
Mm.
are constantly surprising me, and that I enjoy and that I check out and that I listen to. And I don't listen to as much new music as I should or could, and I find that streaming, not Spotify, mind you, I'm very anti Spotify, but I would, try to engage more with newer music, just with listening. Like I have a long commute to my studio every day, so I try to engage with newer music and listen to stuff that I wouldn't normally, because it's, for me, it's easy just to like, oh, I want to listen to some music, and I'll put on something that, like a Georgie Ben record or a Joni Mitchell record or something that's 50 years old that I
Mm.
love, and I'll just listen to that. And generally, if I really want to, if I'm down or something and I want to really be joyous or something, I'll listen to something, as most people do, listen to some music that you enjoy and that has good memories for you, and that brings you joy. That's usually what you listen to. But it's always great to discover new things.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, music definitely has a real power to change your mood, for better or for worse. But what are some of so when you're listening to newer tracks, what are some of those newer tracks that you've liked recently that you've been listening to?
um, well, I mean, some of my favorite artists. There's an artist from New York here named Jonas Policewoman, whose career I've followed for a very long time, and her latest record is called Lemon Limes and Orchids, and I listened to that. I saw her live recently, and she's incredible, and I really love her music. Um, uh, it's always hard when people put you on the spot,
Yeah.
and you can't always remember exactly. And as soon as you hang up, I'll be like, "Oh man, I should have said this,"
Yeah.
Um, I mean, because I'm so engaged in always making new music that
Mm.
um I tend to be like, rattle off stuff um that I've heard. But like, some of the newer jazz people like Shabaka Hutchinson, I think is really great. Some of his music. I just did a record with Georgia Ann Muldrow. I think she's phenomenal artist. We did a collaboration record with Harriet Tubman, which is a band that I've been working with for the last 10 years here in New York, like veterans of the New York downtown scene, a jazz rock trio. And we collaborated with Georgia Ann. Um, there's a guy here in New York named Kochimea Gastelum, and he's the instrumental music. He's a saxophone player. Came out of the Daptone music scene. He used to be in Sharon Jones, the Dap Kings. He's kind of known for that.
And obviously, like you've been in, when did you say you moved to New York? Was it
89.
1989? So that was probably, I think, was Rick Rubin around doing Def Jam Records or just around then as well? There was definitely like what I'm trying to get at here is, has the scene changed a lot from the time?
Totally. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Oh
And
yeah. I
so,
mean, it was
yeah.
like so different back then. Like, people didn't have access to any of these music programs or stuff. Like, back when I was started making hip hop records, people would walk in with one record and say, oh, we're going to make a track or sample this. And you as the engineer would have to make a track for these people, or sometimes on the really shitty late night sessions that you got straddled with as the new guy, you'd be taking the money from these people at midnight and calculating the state income tax, taking the money in cash and putting it in a lockbox. And then before the session even started, and then like, okay, let's go, let's make music after you've just taken, money from these people. And then, sometimes you'd be like, okay, what are we doing? And they're like, yo, we want to make a track. And I'm like, okay, what are we, do you have, are we sampling a record or something? No. Okay, well, what does it sound like? Well, I'll know it when I hear it. I'm like, okay, then you're in trouble. You're like, oh, fuck. Like, oh, we got to really pull something out of a hat here. And you're making a beat for somebody. You're making a track. So you really learn fast and you learn on your hip. So that kind of thing doesn't happen anymore, and, some years down the line, even a couple of years later, like occasionally someone like Prince Paul would bring in a disc for an S900 with a beat on it. But mostly, you were just doing everything, sampling the stuff into the sampler. And so, things have totally changed since then. And people have home studios, or people had to come into a big studio with a 24-track tape machine and, buy a reel of tape that costs $130, or, it costs almost 3 times that much now. So things are totally different. People didn't make records. You didn't have a Billie Eilish making a record in her brother's bedroom, so, the whole landscape of music making has completely been changed by digital. And, I knew people who really groused about it at first and be like, I can't believe this guy, didn't bring me into the studio and he's just asking me to mix his record. And I'm like, man, this guy wasn't going to take you into the hit factory and to record his record in the first place. They didn't have that kind of money. You're lucky they're even paying you to mix their record. Just, it's a different kind of income stream. So you have to understand that, the mechanics of things have changed so much that you can't expect the same protocols, like it's just different. The structure of record companies is different. The A&Rs are different. Somebody was telling me the other day, like, can't remember who I was talking to, but they're like, yeah, it's totally different with record companies. Like they put out records, they're just justifications for these A&R guys to have jobs, but like there's really no one's marketing records and stuff. And people are getting signed because they, the first thing they do is they look at your your Instagram and your Facebook or whatever, your TikTok, and go, oh, this guy's got 50,000 followers. Let's listen to the music. And if they, you have a great, not even a demo, of finished record, and they look at your thing and you've got 2,000 followers, they're like, well, in the garbage.
Yeah.
It's just like it's nothing to do with music. And say what you will about things in the past, like Barry Gordy used to write songs. The guy was a songwriter. And he ran a record label, and he, have you ever, if you should drive down from Toronto one time and go to that Motown museum, and it's a little house, and they used to live upstairs, and it was a tiny studio where they hung the microphones from the ceiling. And, and I just went in there and I was like, man, I'm never going to complain about a studio again. This place, all the incredible records they made in this place. It's actually, about, a little bit big, about the same size as my current studio, which isn't a giant studio either. I don't have a lounge and all that kind of stuff, and a kitchen. I don't have that, it's where you work.
Yeah. Are you using some digital elements now? Or are you still mostly?
I have like a digital analog hybrid studio. I have a vintage Neve broadcast console, and I have a 2-inch tape machine that I don't use that much, unfortunately. I have a big Pro Tools rig. I have a ton of analog outboard gear. And and, all the usual
Bells and whistles.
plugins and all that usual stuff. And I've got a lot of instruments. I've got an organ and, a lot of synthesizers and guitars and amplifiers and stuff like
Yes.
that. But, my partner's, he works for the Les Paul Foundation now, and he's took Les Paul's original console and put it in a big studio out in LA. And he's like, oh man, these studios like ours, they're totally obsolete. The way you work using a console, no one's doing that anymore. Everything's just a big giant room. He said, these young guys, they go in, they're all sitting there on their laptops and they're all wired in and they're all working on the same song, like 5 guys on a laptop working on the same song at the same time while like they're cutting vocals. And it's just like one set of $50,000 speakers and a bunch of laptops and 3 pieces of gear and a couple of microphones.
It probably
And I'm like, well, I'm glad I'm going to be out of the music business. And,
well, probably
you know,
probably speaks to the pace that you touched on Spotify, right? The pace and the demand of what music is now is forcing all these people to like just plug in and like produce because, as you mentioned, Spotify is just churning people for more and more content in a way.
not just Spotify, but everything else, everything is just, content. People don't even really make albums anymore. I mean, I remember talking to my mastering guy like more than 5 years ago, and he was like, yeah, nobody's even making an album. Everyone's making an EP or 2 songs or whatever. And, people are like, I'd be like, okay, yeah, we said, even when you make an album, you say like, okay, let's do the sequence. And they're like, that doesn't matter. People don't listen to a record. And I'm like,
That's
we're going to still do that, man. That's an art. I'm good at that. That's what I do. You listen to a record down from the beginning to the end.
Yeah.
It drives me nuts to like when you're streaming and it doesn't play the record in the right order. And then I hate it when it goes to another, like I want to listen to a record and then it's done. And then, it goes to like some random person. Like I'm listening to the Joni Mitchell channel and then a Sarah McLachlan record comes on. I'm like, I heard it.
Yeah. No, it's true. People don't listen to albums as much as they used to anymore. And even like now, I feel like when people do release albums, they're actually just releasing a bunch of singles. And they're hoping that like 5 out of that album will hit it big. And it's not really about the start to finish journey of that album.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one thing. I mean, hip hop became that a long time ago where, it was just a bunch of super producers making, and every guy is aiming to have the single. Oh, we got Kanye on one track and we got, whatever other, like all the big producers, and we got this guy, we got Snoop doing a cameo, and we got this guy and we got that guy. I mean, I came up and working with Prince Paul and guys who would like very conceptual producers who would make albums with, with stuff and make, and hip hop was a very conceptual genre where, people were pushing the boundaries constantly. And that was one of the things that inspired me about the genre of hip hop is not only were they, technologically making things brand new and putting things together. I mean, that's what blew my mind about Public Enemy. It's like this stuff, it's discordant and bizarre and they're putting all these things together, but it's funky as hell. And it's just so cool. And like, whoever would have thought of that? But it's so dope, like, and it's just like, you can't explain how, and it just inspired me like crazy.
Yeah. There's an artist at the moment. I don't know if you know her, that I think, and maybe you might disagree. I don't know if you've heard of her as Doechii. She's
she's incredible. Like I say, you've seen her tiny desk. She's got a band playing that stuff. Like, I mean, you could hear that. Like I've listened to it and it's like, oh yeah, well, that's the studio, but like to have a band play it. Cause now all these young musicians, like young jazz musicians, like they can play all that shit live. You can, 30 years ago, you couldn't find people that could do that. And now, and a lot of these live bands, live groups that have live bands, they're totally corny. They sound like a fucking cruise ship band, like with a bunch of guys who just play solos and be really corny. But
Yeah.
like that, like, and there's a lot of really, there's a lot of people that are doing some really cool things. But, I mean, I'm a very opinionated guy, so you're going to hear. So
Well, that's
but
great.
a lot of the people who sort of try to do the instrumental hip hop thing, and I've done a lot of that, I think they really miss the mark, because it's just too virtuosic or it just doesn't hit hard enough. And, to me, like that's the essence of the hip hop thing is just crack a lacka. It's got to have the beat, and I've been mixing a record with my friend Vijay Iyer for a band that he has called Fieldwork. And I did a lot of records with him, and then he got signed to ECM, and, which is like a famous jazz label. And, he's working with the guy, Manfred Eicher, the guy who created that style of jazz recording. And he's like, wow, it's so great to be mixing with you again. And, your approach to drums is so different than Manfred. Like, he's like, it doesn't want to mix the drums loud. And I'm like, well, yeah, well, that's not me. I said, it all starts from that. And I said, I think it comes from the fact that I make beats and I make tracks, and
Right.
I used to be able to play drums a little bit. I can't really do that anymore, but, like understanding how rhythmic patterns and the structure of beats work, and how, the kick and the snare and all those other things interact with each other, and it's compositional. So that's kind of how I mix things and how I write things and how I produce things. It's that's the foundation of it. And, most of the time when I'm mixing something, I start and I put the drums up and I get the drums really banging. And then I put everything over top of that. And some people would disagree with that and would say like, well, you got to mix the whole song together. And yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for that. And I don't disqualify that as something that could be something, but that's the way I do it. And sometimes I won't do it like that. Not sometimes on purpose, or sometimes because, well, this song doesn't really lend itself to that. But in general, if I was to say, well, what do you do first? I'd be like, well, I'd have to say 95% of the time, that's what I do, because that's to me, the first thing that I notice. That's what I hear. I mean, I've listened to some things a million times and mixed things for days. And it's very rare that I could tell you the lyrics of something. And
Yeah.
it's not because I don't think lyrics are important or they're beautiful and I'll read them, but that's just not. But if you ask me, like, what was the beat like? I'm like, oh, that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, yeah, I remember that. Or I remember the sound. Oh, the snare was like, like I remember the texture of things. Or there's certain things that your ear goes to. Like that was one thing about being a jazz musician that was very difficult for me, is that the harmonic movement, like the real great jazz musicians, they just hear that shit immediately, and it's just in their head. And to me, I'm always like, I'd be on a gig and I'm like, hey man, you got a chart for that? Like I didn't know 500 tunes off the top of my head. And at a certain point, I was just like, you know what? I'm not really that good at this. So I'm going to focus on this other shit. And I was always I studied composition in music school, and that was always more what interested me. So the studio and making tracks and making beats and writing music and producing, it just sort of flowed into that more than being the next Pat Metheny or whatever, like being a jazz guitar player. It was like, there's a lot of guys out there that do that and they're better than me. But this, a lot of guys out there that do this that are like me.
So you kind of found your kind of like, you found what you were good at, found what you were passionate for, and kind of went into it that way.
Yeah.
As they say in the Japanese, the izakaya. Is it the izakaya? No, there's a word for it where it talks about melding your passion, what you get paid for, what you enjoy doing, into that one thing.
Izakaya is a bar.
Yeah, that is a bar. There's another word for it. I need to. I'll come back to it.
So Scott, were you always like musical growing up, or did like music find you?
Yeah, kind of. I took the little sort of Yamaha organ lessons when I was a little kid, but was never like a prodigy or anything like that. And then I started playing guitar when I was, I think, 11 or something like that, and played in bands, played in a lot of bands. And my brothers were both, I have two brothers, one older and one younger. My younger brother lives in they both live in Vancouver still. And my younger brother's a professional musician, plays the trombone, and we were in bands together. We were in the Jasmanian Devils. Yeah, they still play occasionally.
Cool.
And my older brother played guitar as well. And so we kind of fed our musical passion together. I mean, my parents weren't musical nuts, but they liked music and they played music and stuff. My dad was kind of into swing and Frank Sinatra and stuff. So I got a little bit of that interest from him. And my grandfather played the organ at the silent movies in Paris, Ontario.
Oh, wow.
And so my mother always said, we got our musical gene from my grandfather.
And I remember you mentioned there you went to music school as well, right?
In Vancouver, I just went.
Yeah.
I went to community college in Vancouver.
Okay.
Yeah. And you find like going to school for music, was that beneficial to you really? Did you find that, or?
To an extent, I mean, I kind of wanted to go and pursue, a degree in music composition. I was really into like 20th century music, and I wanted to go and study in Holland with this guy named Louis Andriessen, who was really inspiring musician, composer, sort of a neo minimalist guy. But I just couldn't afford to keep doing it, and I did 2 years at Vancouver Community College, and then I went on the third year, sort of transferred into UBC and did a couple of courses there part time, and just the institutional of it just didn't sit right with me. It just,
Right.
the attitude, it was just so behind the times. It just seemed like not just the whole professors and the students. It just seemed like, this just is not I don't know, it
Conducive
just seemed, yeah,
creative outlets.
yeah, it just seemed it didn't seem very open. So, and I just took a different path.
And then
Yeah.
straight to New York after that?
Yeah, I mean, I kicked around Vancouver for a couple of years after I graduated. I moved here when I was 25. So, um, probably like 3 years after I finished school, 3 or 4 years,
Right.
gigging around, playing in a lot of different bands in Vancouver. And that's where I started recording. I was in a band called BAM, and the singer had a 16-track studio in her basement, and I just started recording. Like I just started using the studio and recording different things, and just had an aptitude for it.
Okay. So one of the things we were talking to Jeff Hansenborn. One of the things he mentioned that you had the pleasure of or not pleasure. Would love to hear the story about engineering. You engineered Wu-Tang Forever.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to tell the listeners a bit about that. That's a very interesting. I mean, they are a very famous part of hip hop culture.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, RZA is like, a force, a he's a real genius. I mean, I don't throw that word around very often, but the fact, just what he has accomplished on every level, musically and business wise, and just thematically, and just to get that many people, and the way he structured his deals and stuff like that, and the way he was just like ran shit. I worked at this small sort of underground hip hop studio, really back then there was really 3 studios in New York where you could make a hip hop record. The first one I worked at was called Chungking House of Metal, which is where the BC Boys and Run DMC worked. And I worked there for couple of months, a friend of mine sort of helped me get in the door. And then they found out I was Canadian and decided, oh, well, this is a good excuse to fire this guy while we owe him 400
Wow.
bucks. So,
Really?
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it seems small. And I already had a connection at this place, Calliope. So I went up there, and this was one of the other places. And it was more of a little bit more casual, a little more lowbrow, but it was also a place where, you know, they were just building a second room, and I went up there and kind of helped them do some soldering, and kind of just was, they were like, a guy from Vancouver named Bill Hemme, who was in a band called the Pointed Sticks, had worked there, and they were very like, oh, well, we trust Canadians, you know. So they, you know, I got the keys to the studio, and I was one of a couple of different people who worked there, and just started working that midnight shift and just doing everything, just doing all the crazy sessions and stuff. And that was a place where, you know, guys would walk in with a record, and you could, like, they had a turntable
Right.
in both rooms and a sampler, and everything was kind of like, everybody kind of knew the protocol. So you know, if you weren't on the session the next day, another guy would, and the notes on the track sheet, so you could continue to the session without any real break. And, you know, you wouldn't have to bring an engineer. I mean, that was out of the question. It was $35 an hour, and you'd go in there. And through that, I met Prince Paul, who was the producer of De La Soul, and he was doing a band called Resident Alien. And I just started working for him, and we've eventually become very, very close friends over the years. For the last 30 plus years, we've worked together. And around 1993, 94, maybe, he, after we'd been working together for a few years, he had a group called the Gravediggers. And the Gravediggers was him and RZA, this guy named Poetic, who has since passed away, and a guy named Fruquan from Stetsasonic, when Paul was also in Stetsasonic. And they had this sort of rap supergroup. And so it was through that group that I met RZA and started working for him. And he liked me because because Wu-Tang never sleeps. So, you know, and they would, you know, these motherfuckers would show up 8 hours late, and then they would want to work for 8 hours. And there was not a lot of guys who could handle that. It's, you know, even in New York, you know, because we made Wu-Tang Forever in LA at this studio called Amer Ray Can. It was RAY, Amer Ray Can.
Right.
And the studio was owned by Ray Parker Jr., who, I don't know if you remember who he is, but he was the guy who wrote the Ghostbusters theme. And he played with Stevie Wonder, and he was kind of a famous session musician, but he was definitely he bought that studio with fucking Ghostbuster money for sure. And he had he had he had this place in the valley, like a 1-story, like a little warehouse almost in the valley. And there was 2 identical rooms, and we'd already done the first Gravediggers record. And he said, can you come out? We're gonna mix the second. I didn't have anything to do with recording the second Gravediggers record, because I'd been on tour with this band called New Kingdom that I had produced and played guitar in and stuff. And so he wanted me to come out to LA, and I was actually in LA right at that time. And he wanted me to stay in LA and mix the Gravedigger record and help him finish the Wu-Tang record. By then I had actually done a couple of things with Wu-Tang, like remixes or something, but I didn't work on 36 Chambers or anything. So we go out there, and we're in these like 2 identical rooms, like I said. And, you know, this guy Carlos was the original engineer on 36 Chambers, and had worked with RZA for a number of years. And they put us up at this place, one of those furnished apartment places in LA. And we were, of course, oh, well, we'll put the engineers together. So we roomed together. And so, they had Wu-Tang set up in one room. And they were like, well, you mix the Gravediggers. And I'm like, okay. So I mixed like the Gravediggers for a week. And I think I pretty much like mix one song a day, 6 days. So I mixed half the record in a week. And in that week, I think I just heard the song Triumph blasting out of the room across the hall all week. Same song. And slowly guys were trickling in. Like, because I got there to LA before we had, like a couple of days before we actually hit the studio, and RZA was in some apartment and he was like, help me, wire my studio up. So I had like plug all this stuff in, and he had all these synths and drum machines and stuff. He goes, I want to plug everything in and plug them into my ADATs. I want everything plugged in. And, I spent the day like, lying on the floor, plugging shit in. And I'm like, eventually run out of cables and inputs. And I'm like, I can't plug everything in. You don't have enough inputs here. And he goes, okay, fuck it. We're going to Guitar Center. We're buying everything new or whatever. So I'm like, okay. No, we just get in the car and we go to Guitar Center. And I walk in there with him and like God and maybe another guy, couple of guys. And we walk in and it's like, this one guy, Guitar Center nerd guy looks at us, and I'm like, he's like, oh yeah, can you give this? And the guy just looks at us and walks away. And I'm like, that guy just lost himself some sales. And another guy walks by. I'm like, hey, could you give us a hand? We need to pick up some stuff. Next thing you know, we spent, $30,000 or something, like I was like, well, if you really want everything, you probably need to buy this board and another ADAT and get it all. I need a microphone and I just saw this synth. I want to buy that too. So, we just buy a gang of shit. And this other motherfucker who dissed us at the beginning is just glaring over at us. And I just look at the guy like, you lost out, you fucking asshole, racist piece of shit. Fucking walking away from us. You fucking deserve to not get a penny from us. So anyway, so that was before we even got there. So anyway, so we go there, we're mixing, and these are long days. That was back in the day, like, and that was normal, 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day. Cause that was the standard thing is, you have a lockout and it would be a 12-hour lockout. And, they expected you to work that long, especially RZA. But most bands, they, like were paying for a lockout. So, and back then, I used to think, well, the only reason they're hiring me is I can work that hard and that long. Not because I'm good or talented or whatever. It's just because I'm the last man standing. So, we work and I mix like whatever, half the record, more than half the record. And Carlos, who's been recording this record the whole time, I don't even know if they ended up printing that one song. They might have, by the end of the week, they might have got that one song printed. I can't even remember. And like the Wu-Tang record was like months late. Like, I mean, that was back in the day when like there were release schedules. I don't think it was 6 months late, but it was at least 2 or 3 months late. So he flew everybody out to LA because he was like, you have enough trouble getting these motherfuckers to show up in New York. So he's going to sequester them in LA. And we were all staying at the Oakwoods apartments. So he thought this will work. But I mean, Dirty, man, he didn't even show up for at least a week, if not more.
Enjoying his time too much in LA.
Oh, no, he didn't even show up. He was in New York. He wasn't even in LA. And then he comes and he's like, oh, Dirty ain't writing no rhymes. So he didn't even write any rhymes. One of the songs I remember specifically, I was there and Method Man wrote the rhyme for him.
Wow.
So anyway, and we get one day off a week. We get Sundays off. And Carlos was like, well, no, man, there's a couple of, I don't know if he might have produced a track because he used to make break records. so he was a drummer, and he used to make these breakbeat records. But he might have made a beat, but if not, he was involved in recording this record, and he knew all the songs. And he was like, I really want to mix this one song. I'm like, well, why don't you work with Gravediggers this week, and I'll take the Wu. And he goes, yeah, really, Scotty? And I'm like, yeah. I mean, come on, man. You want to do something. You don't want to just sit there all day. But it's like, oh, great, man. Thanks. I'm like, yeah. So Monday morning, Monday at like, we go there at 2:00. Nobody even shows up till 5:00. This was before people had cell phones and shit. So you'd go there and they would give us a code. They said, you had to dial out to even just call someone in LA. And then they would give you a special code if you needed to dial New York. And they gave the code to me and Carlos. And they said, don't tell the band. And I don't think I did, but no one even, those guys didn't even ask me. I didn't, but but next thing you know, they knew the code. I mean, it didn't take them long to figure it out. Carlos probably told them, who knows? But they would just come in at 5:00 and just go on the phone for 2 hours. They wouldn't even do anything for, like, phone time. And they'd come in and then, so the first day, Monday, I don't know, Dak or Yui or one of those guys comes in, and they just come in and look around. And they're like, where's Carlos? I'm like, oh, he's in the other room. He's mixing Wu-Tang. He's mixing the Gravediggers. I'm in here. I'm going to work with you guys today. Because they still had to put vocals on half this shit. I mean, I don't think there was a single song that was even ready to be mixed.
Well,
So, and they just kind of look at me and they walk out and they go find Carlos. 2-3 hours later, RZA comes in. What the fuck are you doing in here? I said, well, Carlos wanted to work on some Gravedigger shit. And I figured, he might as well do that. And I work in here with Wu-Tang and wait for you guys to, I never told you to do that. I'm like, yeah, no, you didn't, but what's the difference?
Yep.
Yeah, but I didn't tell you to do that. I'm like, no, you didn't. And then he just turns around and walks out. Goes to talk to Carlos, I guess. I can't remember. And anyway, that's one story. Well, no, I don't know. I mean, we kind of went back and forth.
Yeah.
And I mean, who knows? I don't even remember what happened after that. Maybe, maybe I went back and I know that I mixed I spent another week doing the grade, but then, there was only 12 or 15 songs for the Gravediggers, and that shit was all finished. Paul came out the second or third week just to kind of check it out. He wasn't that involved because by then Wu-Tang, RZA had blown up so much because Gravediggers came to G Street Records as Paul's project. But by the time they came to the second record, Wu-Tang was so big, and John Baker, the head of Island, was just on the dick of RZA so much, like everybody was, that, RZA was just like, well, give me all the money and I'll do,
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, of course, we'll give you all the money. And he goes, and I want the pipeline, and I want this, and I want this, and I want more money, and I want double the tour support, whatever. I mean, who knows? And by the end of the second week or the middle of the third week, the Gravedigger record was done. So then it was all hands on deck to finish the Wu-Tang record. So then that was just Carlos and I were doing the Wu record in both rooms, which is I'm sure RZA's plan all along that, it eventually have to go to that. And that he was just, tagging the tag team of the Gravedigger record onto that because that had to get done as well.
So yeah, out of that creative chaos came that extremely famous album. Yeah, I mean, it is funny how when you listen to an album, you don't really realize the background of it all. And yeah, you were right there at the roots of it. That's pretty amazing.
Well, I mean, every record has some kind of a bunch of stories like that,
Yeah, I suppose. Like, I mean, that's the thing about creativity in a way. It's like a chaotic thing in your head, or it's a feeling, and you're trying to put some structure on it in the end that it creates almost like a wave that makes sense and has a good feeling.
Yeah, and sometimes adversity creates all kinds of scenarios that will engender like some kind of whole new a new yeah, like a new situation, like a new song or a new situation, or whatever, some tragedy. The drummer is in a car accident or something, and they have to bring someone else in, or whatever. The band breaks up halfway through the record, and producer quits, or whatever. There's all kinds of scenarios that happen that go into the making up of like those, or oh yeah, we made that record and then we scrapped the whole thing and then we remade it. That happens too. I mean, I did a record few years ago with this like super group with the guy from Neubauten. What was his newer band?
Anyway, yeah.
Paul. No, Ash. What was his Ash? But, anyway, Bruce Smith from the pop group, and the guy, the bass player from Sade, and Daniel Ash was the singer and guitar player, and they did did the whole record, and I mixed it, and it was mastered and everything, and then they Bruce, and I knew Bruce socially, and I just ended up doing this record, and I was like, oh, this is kind of cool, do a rock record, and then he calls me like a year later or something. It was like, oh yeah, we redid the whole record because the guy who was the original engineer, who was a real pain in the ass, actually, for me, like getting the files and doing everything. They're like, he's claiming he was the producer, and our lawyer told us that like we had to like not do anything that he produced. I'm like, my sense is he didn't produce anything. Like I said, you were the producer as far as I could tell, and that this guy was just the engineer. But they had the guy had made them sign. They had a contract or something. It was so there's weird situations like that happen all the time.
Yeah. So we're kind of coming towards the end of the podcast. One of the things that I'm kind of curious about, because you've had such
we didn't even talk about any of the good stuff, man.
Okay, well, actually, let's keep it rolling then. What do you?
I don't know. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, what I was going to ask you is, you've had such a colorful, a creative background and created such a career for yourself through it. Like, what is your advice to somebody who is trying to just start out now? Like they're in a jazz band today, or they want to get into, engineering. Like, what's some of the advice that you would have for them?
Don't go to engineering school.
Okay.
Do not do that.
Get look in the studio. Is that better?
Total waste of money. I mean, I used to tell people, buy an 8-track and just tell all your friends you record their bands for free. But, you don't even have to do that anymore. It's just like, you get an interface for your laptop and buy some microphones and record them in your parents' basement or whatever, and just start doing or make beats and start working with people and find a voice. If it's sort of hip hop stuff that you want to do, like make a bunch of beats and develop that, and find somebody that you want to find a voice that you want to do. Like a guy that I went to music school with, who's been playing in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra for the last 30 years. His son makes beats. He came to my studio like 10 years ago when he was still in high school, like playing me beats. And I was like, I might want to try some 808s on here. And I gave him a little bit of advice. But this kid, like, he signed a fucking 6-figure publishing deal last year.
Jeez.
I'm like,
Wow.
what the fuck, man? Jimmy, I said, Jimmy, this kid, he's blowing us away. Like, he doesn't need my advice, but I mean, I told him and he started working with a bunch of kids that he met on the internet, just producing tracks with guys that he never even met, like kids down in Atlanta and kids from all over. They have like a sort of hip hop production collective. And now he's trying to sort of move on from that. And, Jim was like, well, what should he do? And I'm like, he needs to find a rapper or a singer. He needs to find someone that he can produce himself.
Right.
And develop that person and, make his signature. And that's what you need to do is work with people. Or if, you want to, develop musical language with other people and develop person skills. Don't just sit in your bedroom. You want to work with people, develop some skills with like interacting with other people and human skills and learn, go travel and learn see the world. I've been all over I made records in Brazil. I've made records in Africa. I've made records in Iceland. I've made records in England. I've toured, and I was like, I was in a car accident 18 years ago and I'm in a wheelchair now. So I can't really do a lot of that stuff anymore, but I'm glad that I just went for it like all the time. And I just did as much stuff as I could. And, like someone's like, okay, we need you to go to Norway tomorrow. I'm like, okay, send me the ticket. And so I did all that, and it's like, I got a lot of props in Brazil, because I've worked with some great bands. And, I got tons of props for working with this band called Nassau Zumbi. It was like a big cult band there. And I made a really great record with them. But, a lot of people are like, oh man, none of the gringos would come down here. And people love me. And I still do, and I still get tons of props from them. I still make records with people in Brazil all the time. And some of my best friends live in Brazil. And, my one of my very closest friends is Brazilian. His daughter is my goddaughter. Like I'm doing a record with him right now. So I've established relationships with people, all over. I just saw the Stereo MCs a month ago, and I made a record with them 34 years ago. So, you make relationships with people and you keep in touch and you just fucking work your ass off. I always tell people I have no fucking talent. I had none. My talent, I just realized, or at least I thought I didn't. So what I did to make up for that insecurity or whatever was just I worked and I worked and I worked and I worked hard. People say, oh yeah, I want to be an engineer. And I'm like, okay, you want to work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for the next 10 years of your life? And they're like, no, what? And I'm like, okay, you better find something else to do. Maybe that thing they're taking job applications at the real estate office. So, like you have to have that dedication. You have to have that passion. You have to really want to do it. I mean, I'm 61 years old and I'm still excited about going to my studio every day and going to work and working on stuff and working with new people and just exploring ideas and I buy new equipment, I'm trying to learn how to use this other little beat making box right now for this new project. It's like, I try to do different things all the time. So it's just like continue to grow, continue to ask questions, continue to challenge yourself. But also there's people that I just finished mixing a record for Vernon Reid, and I mixed his first solo record 30 years ago. And now I've mixed his second record 30 years later. So, you don't burn bridges and continue to foster relationships with people and longevity,
Yeah. So stay interested, work hard, just start, make relationships.
Yeah, just start. Like everybody thinks like it's a daunting thing. Like even, you can put that on anything like, oh, how are we going to have a podcast? Oh, that's such a huge job. How are we going to do it? Just start, do a first episode. What's going to happen then? Then we'll do a second episode. Yeah. It's like, sometimes I used to get these giant things, like, I've made a lot of records where people just jam for 2 days and then they're like, make a record out of that. It's like, oh, fuck, that's a lot of stuff to do.
Yeah.
It's a lot of stuff to go through, but you know how you do it? You just start at the beginning.
Yeah.
You just start at the beginning and you just keep going, because you're going to find something good. And then you make something out of that. And you go, okay, I got something here. Okay, and now I kind of got a vibe of what I can do with this. Then you find the next little piece, and then you make something else. Then you just keep going. And that's a metaphor for life. That's a metaphor for everything that you can do, is just start. Don't
Just the
say, oh, I
process.
can't do it. Oh, that's so much work. Oh, I can't do it. I'll never be able to do that. I was an insecure guy from an early age, but I just took the bull by the horns and I got one life to live here. I got
Yep.
one chance to do what I want to do with my life, and I'm going to do it. I'm not going to make any excuses. I'm not going to let being disabled hold me back. I'm not going to let being undocumented worker in the United States hold me back. I'm not going to let the fact that I'm the lone white guy in this room hold me back.
Yeah. Or the lone Canadian in the room full of Americans.
That too, so it's just perseverance and like a belief that you can do it, even though you don't, you have to believe that you can do it.
Yeah.
Even if you're insecure and you don't think you can do it, you have to convince yourself that you can do it, because no one else is going to think that you can do it. So you just have to go, just do it. I hate to, quote Nike, but
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah. Well, that's I mean, Tom, is there anything you have to wrap up on?
I think we touched on a lot of stuff we were interested in talking about.
that's a good way. That's a good place to end it,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah, I think and really appreciate you coming on, Scott. And
Oh yeah, my pleasure.
anytime you're back in Canada, let us know. And
Let us know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take me out for a pint of Guinness.
we will
Happily.
push the best spots. We'll show you the best spots.
And just to wrap up, the word I was looking for was ikigai. Ikigai. It's basically
Icky guy. Okay.
Yeah, that's the one. It's
I've never
where
heard that. Man.
yeah. It's basically where you find what you love, what the world needs, what you'd be paid for, and what you're good at, and as those all things intersect.
That's
That
nice.
was the word.
Icky guy.
Yeah, ikigai.
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 Icky guy.
There you go.
That's my new name.
Perfect. Well, there we go.
Thank you.
All right,
so
you
much.
guys.
Yeah. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Appreciate
Well,
it.
you guys would say, cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you,
Smoke
man.
it.
Yeah.
Well, we're all immigrants here. So you've injected something into Canada that's good. I'd like to think I've injected something into America that's good, and that let's keep immigrants strong.
Yeah.
Let's keep going. Let's keep going.
Okay.
All right, you guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.